Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our fifth seminar for this semester. We're in week 7, and we are now on the topic cybersecurity and digital changes in PNG. So a lot has been happening over the past couple of years and weeks and months. I don't know whether you've read the latest development in regards to the Department of ICT and the service pass system that they're introducing, and the new MOU that they signed with NESFund. So what they're trying to do is create a financial platform, information ID platform where everything, the government has a single platform where everything is connected. So that's something that is happening currently, and I hope all of you will monitor the progress and uh, keep yourself up to date with the changes. But that is our topic for these next 2 weeks. We'll be looking at cybersecurity and digital changes that are happening in PNG. So we have 7 questions that will be answered by the 7 groups. We'll start off with our first group, Group 1, which is represented today by Francis and Della. So Francis and Della, please, the virtual microphone is yours. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Yagira and everyone. So on behalf of the Group 1, Dela and I will be representing. So we'll be answering the statement questions, which are the statement question, which is Nathan Gura et al. Argue that ICT infrastructure planning in PNG must weather geopolitical tension with growing friction between global powers, especially as PNG builds capital-intensive digital systems. So they have decided to distribute distribute the question, which I will be answering the first part of the question, and Della will be elaborating on the risk and risk which is on the which PNG can face if strategic ICT projects are shaped more by external powers, competition in PNG national interest. So to my question, how does ICT infrastructure become a national security issue for PNG and not just a development issue? So according to Nathan Gora et al., understanding the regulatory environment for ICT infrastructure in PNG, given how closely digital systems interact with sovereignty, governance, and geopolitical rivalry, ICT infrastructure in PNG is a national security concern as well as development issue. So there are 4 main areas in which ICT can be clearly seen as a national security issue for PNG. The first one is critical infrastructure dependency. Second one is geopolitical weakness. The third one is cybersecurity risk, and the last one is debt and dependency. So under critical infrastructure dependencies, PNG's vital infrastructure currently includes ICT networks, which are mobile systems, data centers, and submarine cables. So ICT is closely linked to national security since disruption of compromise can cripple banking system, governments, functions, and communication. So under geopolitical weakness, according to Nathan Gora et al., the ICT strategy needs to weather geopolitical tension with growing friction between global powers. This is due to the fact that initiatives like the Coral Sea Cable System, which is funded by Australia, and the Kumul Submarine Cable Network, which is funded by China, or are not neutral. Rather, they include PNG in strategic rivalry between Beijing and Canberra. And the third one is cyber security risk. Systems constructed abroad may have security flaws or be vulnerable to spying. For example, One example of how outside funding led to debt loads and security issues without providing a secure infrastructure is the unsuccessful Huawei-backed data center project. And lastly, the debt and dependency, which is PNG is vulnerable to debt distress due to its heavy reliance on concessional loans, such as those of China Exim Bank, which might restrict its policy autonomy and give external powers an advantage. So now I would like to hand over the mic to Della to elaborate more on the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. Now moving on to the second half of our question. What risks does PNG face if strategic ICT projects are shaped more by external competition than PNG's national priorities? Now, PNG will face a lot of risks as mentioned and highlighted by Nathan Negara and others. A few of these risks include security vulnerabilities and exposure to surveillance, increased public debt and financial risk, poor project outcomes and failed investments, lack of transparency and accountability, weak governance and risk of mismanagement, and risks from foreign control over data systems. All of these are very serious and important to understand. However, I will only focus on two main risks that I believe are of greatest concern to PNG. Firstly, security vulnerabilities and exposure to surveillance. Now, this risk poses a major threat to national security. The IGIS project, which involved Huawei Technologies as a primary contractor, illustrates the risk clearly. According to the study, an assessment found that the National Data Center had security vulnerabilities and insufficient firewall protections, making it vulnerable to hacking and surveillance. There were also concerns about outdated encryption systems, which further weakened the security of government data. This example shows that when ICT infrastructure is developed through external partnerships without strict oversight, it can expose sensitive government information to potential foreign access, thereby threatening PNG's sovereignty and national security. Secondly, it increases public debt and financial risk. Now, this risk is another critical issue. The IGS project was funded through a concessional loan from China Exim Bank, accounting to around 53 million, which contributed to PNG's rising public debt. Despite the significant investment, the project was later described as a failed investment due to poor implementation and underutilization. This demonstrates how externally influenced projects may not align with PNG's actual needs, leading to costly outcomes with little return. The report also warns that reliance on foreign loans creates potential vulnerability to debt distress, which can limit PNG's economic independence and policy flexibility in the future. So PNG will possibly encounter such risks if strategic ICT projects are shaped more by external power competition than PNG's national priorities, because bigger countries are competing for influence and control, and this can push PNG to follow their interests instead of focusing on what the country actually needs and what works best for its own development. Thank you, and that's all.
Thank you, Della, and thank you, Francis, for a very interesting presentation. The competition between Telstra, Digicel, which is part of Telstra, and Huawei, they represent the individual or their respective states as well, China and Australia. So, it's interesting what's happening. I hope all of you will continue to monitor the changes that are happening in that space. Our next presenters are from Group 2, Anne-Marie and Prudence. Please go ahead with your presentation. They'll be looking at cyber espionage.
So this is seminar 5, something 2. Question reads, Insta highlights the risks and rewards of cyber espionage for the Chinese state. To what extent does China's cyber espionage strategy provide a competitive advantage? And how does it influence global perception of China as a security threat? So I will first define the question. What is cyber espionage and how it applies to China? So according to Carnegie Council, cyber espionage is the use of digital technologies to secretly collect sensitive information for political or economic advantage. Now, Nigel Insta argues that for China, this has become a central pillar of its modern intelligence strategy. So what's really important here is the shift. China has moved from traditional human-based intelligence to what Insta describes as technology-driven large-scale data collection. So through organizations like the Ministry of State Security and the military, China can now collect massive amounts of foreign intelligence, access government and corporate networks, and operate globally without needing a physical presence. So Insta calls this a step change because the scale and reach are completely different from the past.
So what are the risks and rewards of cyber espionage for the Chinese state? First, the benefits are huge. Scale and efficiency. Cyber tools let China collect massive amounts of data. Operations like GhostNet 2011 and Shadeware 2012 show how information can be gathered globally over long periods. Low risk, high return. Traditional spying is very risky. Agents can get caught. Cyber espionage removes much of that danger. 3. Plausible deniability. Okay, so this is when evidence is intentionally avoided or hidden to ensure that denial appears credible if the activity becomes public. So even when attacks are traced back to China, it's hard to prove direct responsibility. That gives China room to deny involvement, like in the Mandiant APT1 report. And technological catch-up. It helps China access advanced technology faster, building on earlier methods discussed by David Weiss 2011. In simple terms, it's efficient, scalable, and relatively safe. But instead, it's clear that it's not all advantages. Reputation damage. Reports like APT1 and warnings from agencies like M15 have strengthened the image of China as a cyber threat. Geopolitical tension. Cyber espionage has become a major issue between China and Western countries, especially after incidents like the Google Aurora attack. Lack of coordination. Insta describes a kind of wild east situation. Many actors involved are not always fully controlled, and uncertain results. Stealing data doesn't always lead to long-term success. Cases like Nortel show that the outcomes can be mixed. So it's powerful, but it also carries significant risks.
Moving on to our question, to what extent does this give China a competitive advantage? So overall, it is China's cyber espionage strategy that gives it a significant but not perfect advantage. So why it's effective? It's because it allows China to skip stages of development by accessing foreign technology. It builds on the grains of sand approach, just scaled up digitally. Reports like Northrop Grumman 2009 show these efforts are organized and systematic. So this creates a real advantage, especially against highly digital economies. But it's limited. You still need innovation at home, not just storing information. Countries are improving cybersecurity, making attacks harder, and exposure leads to political and economic consequences. So yes, it helps in short term, but for long term, it's not guaranteed.
So how does this shape global perceptions of China? This is where things really start to matter politically, because China is seen as a major cyber threat because of repeated incidents and reports. Many countries now see China as a state-backed cyber actor, not just a normal competitor. Cyber espionage also damages trust, especially in partnerships. For a country like Papua New Guinea, this is important because it is still developing its digital infrastructure, so it relies on foreign partners. That creates a situation where there's also opportunity for development, but also vulnerability to external influence or surveillance. And increased global tension, cyber espionage feeds into broader geopolitical rivalries to push countries to invest more in cybersecurity and treat China more cautiously. And China argues that it is also a victim of cyber attacks, and that Western countries do similar things. So all in all, there's no full agreement, but suspicion of China still remains strong. So to wrap it up, China's cyber espionage strategy is a powerful tool because it gives China a real advantage through large-scale, low-risk data collection, but it also creates serious downside, especially in terms of trust and global reputation. At the end of the day, it's a trade-off. China is gaining power and information, but also being and increasingly seen as a global security threat. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, you too, and thank you very much, Anne-Marie and Prudence, for a very interesting answer. It also challenge us to think, are we capable of doing something similar? Do we have the capabilities to conduct cyber espionage, PNG, I mean? That's something for us to think about. You future policymakers and leaders, we see from China's advanced capabilities and what they're capable of doing and the risks that are involved. Let's listen to Aaron and Cheryl representing Group 3. Let's go ahead, the virtual microphone is yours.
Mr. Yegiora and everyone. Anton and I will represent Group 3 in this seminar. So our question and statement reads, Natengera et al. Highlights that PNG is connected to multiple submarine networks, including the China-linked Kumul submarine cable networks and Australia-funded Coral Sea cable system, both framed as part of a battle influence. So from PNG's perspective, how should the government balance connectivity benefits with sovereignty and security concerns? Apologies. So from PNG's perspective, how should the government balance connectivity benefits with sovereignty and security concerns, and what safeguards should be built into ICT agreements to protect PNG's strategic autonomy? So moving on to our introduction. The Kumul submarine cable network and the Coral Sea cable system are prime examples of how critical digital infrastructure has become a central arena for geopolitical competition in the Pacific. While both projects set the same goal of improving telecommunications in Papua New Guinea, they emerged from and are viewed through very different strategic lenses. So according to Watson 2021, the laying of two largest subsea fiber optic cables in PNG, the KSCN and the CS2, are considered part of the battle for influence between China and Australia in the Pacific region. Most of PNG's infrastructure projects are funded by international partners, and technology mostly originates from third-party providers. So the KSCN is part of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, while the CS2 subsea cable deployment is funded by Australia and part of Australia's Pacific Step Up that serves the core purpose of ensuring the Pacific Islands won't fall under the influence of China. This is according to Layton 2022. So the two projects have been seen as competing for influence and leverage in Papua New Guinea and the Pacific, where both China and Australia have strategic and economic interests. The project have also raised concerns about potential security implications of giving Chinese or Australian authorities access to sensitive data and communication in the region. This is according to Wesley 2020 and Parks 2021. So moving on to the first part of our question, how should PNG balance connectivity benefits with sovereignty and security concerns? So we have 5 points under this question. Our first point is PNG must diversify its infrastructure partnerships. So the coexistence of the China-backed Kumul submarine cable network and the Australia-funded Coral Sea cable systems both reflects broader geopolitical competition. While this enhances connectivity, it also exposes PNG to competing external influence. Therefore, PNG should continue engaging multiple partners like Australia, China, and multilateral donors, rather than relying on a single country. As supported by Raja et al. 2019, engaging multiple partners reduces our dependence and strengthens bargaining power. Moving on to our second point, maintaining national control over critical ICT infrastructure. So concerns about foreign influence arise when infrastructure is financed and operated externally. For instance, the Huawei-built data center raised cybersecurity concerns due to weak standards, highlighting risks to data sovereignty. Ensuring state oversight through entities like PNG Dataco is therefore essential. This is according to Foster 2023. Moving on to our third point, PNG should maintain national control over critical ICT. Cybersecurity governance and institutional capacity. So according to Australia Strategic Policy Institute 2020, weak implementation and regulatory gaps in cybersecurity governance increases vulnerability to cyber threats and foreign interference. So the government should prioritize safeguarding essential systems and services vital to PNG's national security and economic stability, implementing measures to strengthen the resilience of critical infrastructure against cyber threats, ensuring uninterrupted operations and service delivery. So our fourth point, PNG should update the national data governance policy. So to ensure the protection of citizens' rights, this policy must be updated to serve as a formal government guideline. This aligns with the Department of Information and Communication Technology 2024, page 6, which noted that the government aims to adopt measures that protect data and associated fundamental rights and freedoms, including the right to privacy to ensure public trust in the use of data. And to our last point, PNG should adopt a debt-conscious development strategy. So the article notes concerns about overpriced contracts and heavy borrowing from China's Exim Bank, which may create long-term financial dependence. This reflects broader debt diplomacy risk observed in Pacific states. This is according to Smith 2019. So PNG debt conscious strategy must go beyond just setting debt limits. It must also carefully evaluate who it borrows from and on what terms to avoid long-term financial and political dependence. Thank you, and I will hand it over to Anton to continue the presentation.
So once again, thank you, Cheryl, and I will be elaborating on the second segment of the question itself. So it reads, what safeguards should be built into the into ICT agreements to protect PNG's strategic autonomy? So basically, we have 6 specific strategic approaches which can be integrated into ICT agreements to protect PNG's strategic autonomy, of which the first one is transparency and accountability. The second one is data sovereignty and cybersecurity clauses. The third one is debt sustainability safeguards. The fourth one is local participation and capacity building. The fifth one is regulatory clarity and national security screening. And of course, the final one is competition and anti-monopoly provisions. So I will be basically elaborating on each of the points through the preceding slides. So moving on to the first point, it says transparency and accountability mechanisms. PNG should require full disclosure of long-term procurement processes and contracts, addressing the lack of transparency highlighted in ICT projects. Transparent procurement reduces corruption and political interference. That's quoted from the Asian Development Bank 2020. Moving on to the second point, it's on data sovereignty and cybersecurity clauses. Agreements must clearly define data ownership. There should be mutual interest between PNG and foreign investors in terms of data ownership. Data storage location, preferably within PNG, restrictions on foreign access. PNG database and data systems should not be easily accessed by foreign investors or foreign ICT institutions, but it should be at all cost protected by the national entity itself. And this is crucial given concerns that foreign-built infrastructure may enable surveillance or unauthorized data access, as cited from CLEC 2021. Moving on to the other point, which is debt sustainability safeguards. Contracts should include independent cost-benefit analysis, limits on sovereign guarantees, preference for grants or concessional financing, and this reduces risk of unsustainable debt burdens linked to infrastructure loans, as cited from Raja ETAL 2019. So the third point is on local participation and capacity building. ICT agreements should mandate technology transfer, local workforce participation, inclusion of PNG PEMs. So local participation, under this local participation and inclusion of PNG workforce, basically in the local workforce participation, we have these ICT experts and which are fully equipped with substantial in-depth understanding as to how ICT functions. So we should at least integrate their contributions into the ICT world to fully get a collective views and support from the nationally owned experts instead of just focusing our what on the foreign consultancy and all this. So yeah, I think we have some very good ICT. And the next point is local workforce inclusion of PNG firms. There should be inclusivity of key ICT firms in PNG such as Digital PNG, Vodafone PNG, and Telecom PNG alongside IT service providers such as Datec PNG, Daltron, and Digitech. Their vital contributions can enhance local participation and capacity building in order to protect PNG strategic autonomy. So moving on to this reduces long-term dependence on foreign expertise and promotes domestic capability, as cited from GSMA 2019. Moving on to the fifth point, it's on regulatory clarity and national security screening. The article highlights unclear definitions of sensitive infrastructure, which weakens oversight. PNG should clearly classify critical ICT infrastructure. Critical ICT infrastructure mainly talks about things such as submarine cable systems, Coral Sea submarine, Kumul submarine cables, and the national mobile tower network managed by Data Core Digital and emerging digital public infrastructure like the service pass or digital ID systems. Establish formal national security review mechanisms. Moving on to the final point, which is competition and anti-monopoly provisions. Weak competition in PNG's ICT sector limits efficiency and increases political influence. Agreements should promote open access, prevent vendor lock-in, and encourage multiple service providers. So these are basically some of the 6 strategic approaches that the PNG ICT institution can get and integrate it into the system to safeguard its national autonomy. So I've come towards the conclusion. PNG can benefit significantly from submarine cable connectivity, but these projects are embedded in geopolitical competition. By diversifying partnerships, strengthening national control, and embedded robust safeguards in ICT agreements, PNG can maximize digital development while preserving its sovereignty, security, and strategic autonomy. With that, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. And Mr. Yagura, I think I have come towards the end of our Group 3's presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anton, and thank you, Cheryl, for representing your group. A very detailed presentation with also good references supporting your presentation. We now move on to the next group, Group 4, Tanya and Odelia, sorry.
All right, so Odelia and I will be representing Group 4, and the question that we were assigned to do this week reads, Lindsay and Chung discuss the challenges China faces in converting cyber espionage into practical economic gains. How does China's reliance on cyber espionage for technological advancement expose vulnerabilities in its innovation system? So we have divided the question into 2 parts. And the first part of the answer I'll be answering, which reads, identify the challenges that China faces when it tries to turn cyber espionage simply meaning stealing technology to information into real economic benefit and goals. So firstly, before we move on into answering the first part of the question, let me just define what cyber espionage means. So according to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, cyber espionage describes the method of intelligence collection, particularly as a process of obtaining information that is not available to the public, but utilizing humans, for instance, using agents to spy and steal information, or technology through hacking of systems or sites where confidential data is stored. Moreover, Lindsay and Cheong 2015 mentions that as governments and corporations put more of their valuable data into digital form, there are more espionage targets available and more channels to access them at lower risks as compared to human spies. In considerable amount of an organization's vital information is not in electrical format at all, but rather encoded in asset knowledge, social relationships, physical layouts, and workplace routines. Now, moving on to answering the question, again, according to Lindsay and Chong 2015, some challenges highlighted in the reading would relating to cyber espionage is firstly due to the abundance of digital data and the complexity of contemporary network technology and the rapid growth of technological advancement has posed or concerns as a direct measurement of losses or poses fertile in espionage. The second one is the robust cybersecurity policies and legal protection, which they have invested into creating or designing a robust and reliant policies and legal framework closely related to monitoring and detecting cyber espionage in the early stages from external threats. So in this manner, it poses as a challenge for the other state to steal their confidential data. And lastly is intensified internet governance, which explains the complex interaction between state security, international law, and technical control to manage the internet, and the landscape of digital spying shifts. For instance, strengthening and governing cybersecurity to keep network system of governments, organizations, and businesses from being vulnerable to cyber espionage, as there are more espionage targets available and done digitally today compared to human spies. Thank you, and I will hand over the microphone to Odelia to explain the second part of our main question. Thank you.
Okay. I will be talking about China's dependence on cyber espionage and why it weakens China's innovation system. And yes, in today's world, technology is very important for a country's growth and global power. China has become one of the leading countries in technology, but some of its progress has been linked to cyber espionage
And as my partner has mentioned, cyber espionage in the sense of secretly hacking or stealing information such as technology and business secrets from other countries. In the reading, some of the reasons outlined was that the first one being one major problem is that it reduces original innovation. Innovation is all about creating new ideas through research, testing, and creativity. However, when companies rely heavily on copying or stealing technology, they may not feel the need to develop their own ideas. And in a way, it slows down their creativity and limits the production of new and unique technologies. Another issue is the lack of deep understanding. When technology is developed internally, scientists understand how and why it works because they're involved in the entire process. But when technology is stolen, it often comes without the full background or development process. Another is the reliance on cyber espionage. It creates dependency on other countries. And instead of building strong local research systems, China may depend on foreign countries as sources of new ideas and advanced technology. This is very risky if those countries restrict access to access due to political or security concerns. And if access is cut off, China's technological progress could slow down significantly. It also weakens the overall innovation system. A strong system requires cooperation between universities, researchers, companies, and the government itself. And it also depends on education, skills, and investment in research. If the focus is on copying rather than creating, these institutions may not develop properly, and the country's ability to produce its own innovation may be weakened. Another important problem is the loss of international trust. Countries and companies may avoid working with China if they believe their ideas will be stolen. This reduces opportunities for partnerships, investment, and knowledge sharing. And to wrap it up, cyber espionage can lead to political and economic consequences. Other countries may respond with trade restrictions or sanctions that can limit China's access to global markets and advanced technologies. And of course, would slow down the economic growth itself. And yes, while cyber espionage may provide short-term benefits, relying on it heavily creates long-term weaknesses in China's innovation system. And it can, as I've mentioned, reduce creativity, limits understanding, and creates dependency, weakens institutions, and damages its international trust. For sustainable growth, China must focus on developing its own ideas, investing in research, and building a strong and independent innovation system. Thank you, and that is all from us.
Thank you, Adelia and Tanya, for sharing with us your answer to the question. I'm sure many of you have a lot of questions to ask. So make use of the discussion forum this week. But one point to note is that, compared with what China is doing, comparing with PNG, we still have a long way to go in terms of our human intelligence and cyber intelligence. I'm happy to see that security is included in the MPDP4, Medium-Term Development Plan 4. So we put more money into developing our security capabilities, especially human intelligence and cyber intelligence for our security agencies. Let's now listen to Elizabeth and Cheyenne, representing Group 5. Please, Group 5, go ahead, get your microphone these days.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. So, good morning, Mr. Yagura, fellow classmates. So, representing Group 5, myself and Cheyenne will be presenting our findings on the given research question, which is next. Which is Nathan-Gara et al. Highlights that Papua New Guinea is connected to multiple submarine cables networks, including the China-linked Kumul submarine cable network and the Australia-funded Coral Sea cable system, both framed as part of a battle for influence. So from PNG's perspective, how should the government balance connectivity benefits and sovereignty and security concerns? And what safeguards should be built into ICT agreements to protect Papua New Guinea strategic autonomy? So I will be focusing on explaining the context and risk of the proposed two underwater cable systems. And Cheyenne will be focusing on answering the question by stating the safeguards, which also provide ways in which the government can balance the benefits with sovereignty and security concerns. So PNG is connected to multiple undersea cable systems, two of which are the China-linked Kumul submarine cable network and the Australian-funded Coral Sea cable system. These underwater cables provide reliable network connectivity across PNG's geographically dispersed islands and enhances access to international data networks, which improves regional integration and trade, and also enhances education, healthcare, and government services by enabling digital platforms. So with the ongoing geopolitical tensions between China and the Western powers, PNG has become a significant strategical location in the Pacific. Thus, both powers are trying to implement their influence in the country through these submarine cable lines. Now, how can PNG leverage the benefits these projects bring in while also safeguarding its national sovereignty and reducing its security concerns? So here are some risks which came up. So Papua New Guinea's dependence on foreign funded infrastructure may also expose it to, first one is surveillance and cyber vulnerabilities. So as stated by Sherman 2021, he stated that in the Scroll Center for Strategy and Security that authoritarian governments, especially China and like Moscow, are shaping the internet topography and digital behaviors through undersea cables. So for instance, the Chinese government building cables that will increase the overflow of internet traffic through its borders, which it could then exploit for intelligence gathering. The second risk is political leverage by external powers. So great powers in particular seek to intervene in the development of cable connections to center the network around them geographically, to strengthen their footing in associated sectors, and to increase their reliance to the aggressive strategies of rivals. Abel's 25. So now I will leave it to my friend Cheyenne to explain to you guys on the safeguards.
Thank you, Ali, for the virtual mic, and I'm going to explain about the safeguards. Okay, first I will define safeguards. Safeguards are proactive measures, role or mechanism implemented to reduce risk, prevent harm, and ensure safety is given in context. They can be physically or procedural, legal or digital, depending on the situation. So the first safeguard is diversify partners, avoiding reliance on one country. The second one is transparent government, public disclosure of ICT agreements, cybersecurity framework, PNG's National Cybersecurity Strategy 2024 to 2030. Okay, the fourth one is the data sovereignty clauses. Keep sensitive data under PNG's
jurisdiction and capacity building, train local engineers to manage the cable system. Okay, before I move on to the conclusion, I will stretch on one more point. This is the strategic autonomy. So strategic autonomy simply means it is a state ability to pursue its national interest and foreign policy independently without excessive and reliance on other nations. So PNG should welcome foreign investment, but like we retain control and build a pardon me, build a redundancy and reliance in network. So like PNG should act as a natural digital hub in the Pacific Island regions. Okay. And a strategy autonomy simply means that shaping ICT development on PNG terms. Okay, moving to our conclusion. Before I would go to the conclusion, I will give an example of a submarine cable. One example of a submarine cable is the one that is in Medang. Yeah, that one that is in Medang that is owned by the Telecom as the international gateways. Okay, moving on to our conclusion. PNG must balance the connectivity benefits with the strategic other. Example, signing the UN Cybercrime Convention show commitment to the global standards, and by embodying safeguards, PNG can enjoy digital growth while protecting sovereignty. That's all, and thank you.
Thank you, Group 5, and thank you, Cheyenne and Elizabeth, for sharing with us your answer to the question. We move on to the next group, Group 6. Group 6 will be represented by Ezekiel and Chinua. Please, Chinua, go ahead.
Good day, class and Mr. Egora. Ezekiel and I will be representing the group 6 to answer the question and to talk about the statement and the question. Nathaniel Gara et al. So the responsibilities between the Department of ICT and the NICTA in ICT infrastructure planning and unclear creating risk of inefficiency and confusion. So how can we governance and clear institutional roles becomes a security vulnerability for PNG? So the question 2 is what reforms would improve accountability and reduce the risk of of political capture or corruption in ICT decision making. So Ezekiel will give a brief summary on the presentation and take the first part of question 1, and I'll take the second part of question 1 to include question 2. Thank you. I'll leave it to Ezekiel.
Now, before we go through the discussion of the question, let's have a look at a brief summary of the statement. So, the Department of Information and Communication Technology, it leads the planning of ICT-related projects, including the provision of infrastructure. So its role is to maintain policy and service delivery oversight, and coordinate the matters related to communication and information, and oversee transformation efforts of PNG digital economy. So the NICTA, it's an independent regulatory authority. Its role is to regulate the areas of telecommunication, radio communication, and broadcasting within the objective of achieving the long-term economic and social development of PNG. So, and the second role is to undergo and manage projects that are funded by the Universal Access and Service Fund. So the responsibility between the ICT and NICTA is unclear, creating risk of inefficiency and confusion, according to Natanegara ATL, because both bodies take the role of executing and lead agencies of ICT infrastructure. And their respective responsibility and level of involvement is not clear, as both bodies act in a coordinated manner or are named as the executing agencies. Now, what reforms would improve accountability? How can weak governance, how can weak governance and unclear institution roles become a security vulnerability in PNG? So, how can unclear institutional roles become a security vulnerability of PNG? Firstly, the role of a lab. When many agencies claim the executing or lead roles without clear boundaries, projects lack and clear ownership, this creates gaps in misunderstanding, underlining the unreliable technical and security requirements, and delays, allowing doubtful choices, poor vendors inspection, or rush procurements that introduce vulnerabilities in national networks. Secondly, the top-down control. Most times, the government and the institution authorities make decisions and do not consider the views of the locals, private sectors, or civil society, then the actual issue go unnoticed. So that makes it easier for leaders to approve biased deals with riskier companies and leave communities less able to cope with themselves when service fails. And thirdly, the state-owned firms dominate. When state-owned enterprises control the whole ICT system, private competitors struggle to enter. Less competitors mean less pressure to keep services secure or to be more accountable. And it opens the door for political interfering in technical and buying decisions. Thank you. I'll leave the.
So the issues under the weak governments, there are many issues. However, I decided to include only two, which I see of importance. The first one is the public-private partnership are excluded targeted financial resources. So the PPP or the public-private partnership are predominantly steered towards the natural and mining sectors, because the main sources of the countries, because it is the main sources of the country's export revenues. So they are not included as one of the targeted finance sources of the ICT sector. So the second one is lack of ICT skills in human resources. So most of PNG infrastructure is foreign funded sorry. So the telecommunication attracts investors. For example, the subsea cables raise security concerns over Chinese or Australian access, as the planned Huawei government data center was argued for poor cybersecurity. So, standard from the first to the last mile and procurement criteria are lacking. So the government must build security capacity in resources for difficult project and evaluation. So I would say the ICT supply chain and regulatory vulnerability remain hard to notice and fix. So now moving on to answering the question 2. What reforms would improve accountability and reduce the risk of political capture of corruption in ICT decision making? So the first measure to take as reform is the government should make the market more welcoming to private investors. So little competition harms the outcome. State-owned companies control much of the ICT market from top to bottom, which discourage private investment and disturb the service quality. So political influence and dominance by SOEs can bias contract awards. So the government should make the market more welcoming to the private investors, such as tax breaks, career licensings, and procurement fewer entry barriers. So moving on to the second measure, which is the government should introduce strong and suitable ICT law. So transparency remains a challenge in public investment. Transparency remains a challenge in public procurement. Tender notices appear in NVC or NICTA websites which limited or disclose of procurement decision and outcomes, but decisions and contract details often are not. So the PPP documents, tenders or assignments contracts are not published. So the government should introduce a strong and suitable ICT law. So moving on to the third measures which government can use to reform the ICT decision making is the government should adopt investment friendly policy or tax initiatives, meaning state-owned or vertically integrated ICT firms dominate PNG's market, limiting competition and deterring private investment. So political influence, especially from the cabinet members, undermines the procurement fairness and SOE management, service quality. So to attract private investment and foreign direct investment, the government should adopt investment-friendly policies, such as tax initiatives, transparent licensing and procurement, and lower market entry barriers. I think I have come to the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Group 6 and Ezekiel and Chinua for representing your group. We now move on to the final group, represented by Mata and Anselm. If you have any questions for our presenters, please share in our discussion forum for further discussion. So Group 7, the virtual microphone is yours, Mata and Anselm.
Good day once again. Mata and I will be representing group number 7 on this seminar. We'll talk about the navigating US-China cybersecurity relations. So our question, our question reads, Kate examines the US responses to China cyber activities. How can the United States and China navigate mutual accusation of cyber aggression to establish a cooperative framework for global cybersecurity? Pardon me. So This presentation, as I've mentioned, it examines how the US and China interact in the cyberspace. Both countries are global leaders in technology and digital infrastructure, but their relationship is marked by frequent accusation of cyber aggression. These tensions are not limited to their bilateral relations. They have significant implications for international stability and global cybersecurity. The goal of this discussion is to identify the challenges, explore opportunities for operation, and propose frameworks that can support a more secure and cooperative digital environment. Now, moving on to the background, the United States and China regularly accuse each other of cyber espionage, which refers to the unauthorized collection of sensitive information through digital means. These accusations have created deep misunderstanding, mistrust between the two nations because both countries are major powers in cyberspace. In rivalry extend beyond bilateral relations and influence global digital security. The mistrust undermines cooperation and increases the risk of instability in international systems such as finance, communication, and defense. Moving on to the challenges, there are several major challenges to cooperation in cybersecurity. First, attribution is difficult determining who is responsible for a contentious and undermines trust. Second, both countries prioritize national security, sometimes at the expense of economic cooperation. This creates conflicting interests that makes collaboration harder. Third point, there is no universal accepted sets of norms or rules for state behavior in cyberspace. Without agreed standards, actions that a country views as defensive may be seen by others as aggressive. These challenges highlights how building cooperation is so difficult, but also why it is necessary. Thank you so much. I'll hand the virtual microphone to Mata.
Right. Taking up from where Winston has left, here are opportunities for cooperation. So even though the United States and China often argue about, cyber attacks, there are still opportunities for them to cooperate. So let's break this down in simple terms. Firstly, confidence building measures. These are small steps that help reduce fear and mistrust. Think of it like two classmates who don't trust each other. They start by sharing small pieces of homework to show they're willing to cooperate. In cyberspace, this could mean sharing basic information about threats or agreeing not to target certain systems. Second, bilateral cyber hotlines. A hotline is a direct phone line between two governments. So imagine if two neighbors kept, accusing each other of stealing. Having a phone line means they can quickly call each other to clear up misunderstandings before things get worse. So in cyberspace, a hotline could help the US and China talk immediately if a suspicious cyber incident happens instead of jumping to conclusions. Third, joint participation in international forums. Forums are like big meetings where many countries come together to discuss issues. So if the US and China both attend and contribute, it shows they are willing to cooperate in front of others. So fourth, shared norms of responsible state behavior. Norms are unwritten rules everyone agrees to follow. And if both countries follow these rules, it builds trust and makes cyberspace safer for everyone. So while mistrust is strong, these opportunities show that cooperation is possible. They are like building blocks, small steps that can eventually lead to bigger agreements and more stability in the digital world. Okay. To establish a cooperative framework for cybersecurity, 4 elements are essential. First, transparency. Both countries should openly share information about cyber threats and incidents. This reduces suspicion and helps prevent misunderstanding. Second, accountability. Independent organizations or third parties should verify claims about cyber attacks. This ensures that accusations are based on evidence and not just politics. Third, collaboration. The US and China should work together through joint task forces to address cybercrime, since many threats are global and affect both nations. Finally, norm development. Both countries should support international efforts, such as those led by the United Nations, to create rules for responsible behavior in cyberspace. These norms provide a common standard that all nations can follow. Policy recommendation. So there are several practice steps that can help move cooperation forward. First, track two diplomacy. This involves informal discussions between academics, experts, and retired officials. These conversations build trust and reduce tensions without the pressure of official negotiations. Second, non-aggression pacts in cyberspace. The US and China could agree not to attack each other's critical infrastructure, such as power grids or healthcare systems. This would reduce the risk of escalation. Third, regional cybersecurity agreements. This cooperation should extend beyond the US and China to include other Asia Pacific nations. So regional agreements strengthen collective security and encourage broader trust. Finally, the public-private partnerships. Since much of the internet infrastructure is owned by private companies, governments must work closely with them. This ensures that both technical expertise and resources are used effectively. What else? In conclusion, the rivalry between the United States and China poses a serious risk to global cybersecurity. Their ongoing accusations and mistrust create instability that affects the entire international system. Although cooperation is difficult, it is not impossible. So progress depends on building trust through dialogue, transparency, and shared rules. If both countries commit to these principles, they can move from confrontation to collaboration. This would not only improve their bilateral relationship, but also strengthen global cybersecurity governance, benefiting all nations. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Group 7, for winding up the presentation, for concluding. We started off by defining what security is as a concept, and then we looked at our first case study, China as a security threat. China as a security threat, and we are now on our second case study, which is cybersecurity. Cybersecurity. In this discussion, we've looked at China and PNG, what China is doing, what PNG is doing. I hope you picked up some of the interesting points that were mentioned by your peer presenters, and you take note. And if you have any questions, comments, we can discuss further in the discussion forum. But that is where we are at the moment. Next week, we'll continue on with our discussion on cybersecurity and digital changes in PNG. So there is a lot of changes happening in terms of the system, the processes, digital capacity. We have universities coming on board trying to move online as well. A lot of changes are happening. Yes, some of the one main point that we mentioned was our cyber security capability, cyber intelligence capability to protect ourselves and get information about what other countries are doing. So that is something that we need to look into as you as future policymakers and leaders, decision makers. It's a good challenge for you, something that you can continue to discuss. So that is all for today. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to the presenters for representing your respective groups. We'll conclude here. We'll meet again next week, Monday, for our the sixth seminar on the sixth one presentation on cybersecurity. Well, that's all of you. Have a good day, and thank you very much for your time and for sharing with us your answers.